Greetings, antique radio enthusiasts. Welcome to another edition of Antique Radio Archaeology. Today begins part 2 of our 3-part series on the Chelsea Super 5 Model 125 TRF receiver. Now before we begin, there's a couple things I'd like to address. Somebody had asked after I published part 1, why is it that TRF receivers weren't represented during this time when the regenerative receivers took off? Well, they were. I mean, TRF receivers were being produced, but the reason why regenerative receivers became so popular amongst not only the radio enthusiasts but also the manufacturers is cost. A regenerative receiver only has one tube, or only needs one tube. The TRF receiver requires 2 amplification steps before it gets to the detector, and then all that costs a lot of money. And then the tube technology really wasn't up to par as it was when it got to about the mid-1920s. So that also helped bring on the new trend of the TRF receiver. So it wasn't just one thing, it was a multitude of things that caused that to happen, but cost was definitely an issue. Now, another thing, going into this video, what I'd like to do after we get done with the restoration of the faceplate and chassis, when I'm doing the components, I'm going to introduce the connections using a schematic. And I'm going to do a snapshot of the schematic, and when I do that, I'm going to mark in red what that connection is. After that connection's been made and we move on to the next one, I'm going to change it to green. So as we go along, the schematic will fill up with green as we keep adding more and more components, and you'll always know by the red what components I just added. So hopefully that'll help you to follow along and kind of understand what's happening as I'm installing all the components back into the radio. Now, one thing I did discover about 3/4 of the way through was that the schematic did have a slight issue, and I had to revise the schematic, which I did on the spot. But don't worry about it. It's a minor change, so it shouldn't affect how you're following things. So if you'd like to follow along, I am going to go ahead and post the schematic in the Facebook Antique Radio Archaeology page. It'll be under the photos in the album Chelsea Super 5 Radio Restoration. So there's a lot to do. We need to go ahead and get started on getting the faceplate restored. We're going to do the chassis next. Put all the components into the chassis and faceplate, join them all together, solder everything up, and when we're done, we're going to have a completely assembled radio, and we'll be able to go on to our final part where we'll go ahead and finish out the cabinet and get the thing operational. So let's go ahead and get started. So now I need to get started on this front panel. There's a couple little things I need to do. There's a chip here, and this veneer right here is obviously busted loose. But the rest of it can be restored or refinished. I'm not too worried about the back of it. So, first things first, I'm going to go ahead and get this veneer taken care of. And that's just a matter of getting a little bit of glue. Now the veneer is kind of lifting over here as well, I noticed. I need to be real careful here. So I really want to get both sections here. And I'm just going to use this to slide some glue up under there. Okay. hold that until that glue dries. Okay. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is with radios, you need to know what finish you're working with. I happen to know that the Chelsea radios use a shellac finish. Other radios may use a lacquer, they may use a varnish, and depending on what you're using really is important in determining how you're going to deal with that finish. A varnish basically has to be stripped off because each layer of varnish sits on top of the other. With a shellac or a lacquer, the medium actually sits in a solvent, and the solvent will melt the previous layers or combine with the previous layers in a way that doesn't happen with a varnish or a polyurethane. Which you don't see a lot of polyurethanes in old radios unless somebody has done a refinishing job on it. So I know what I need to do, and I'm going to use, in this case, alcohol to get rid of all that cracking that you can see on the surface, and then try to refinish this without causing too much damage to the existing finish. Trying to go with the grain. And there we go. That's basically it. Now let me show you real quick the test. I've got some alcohol here. Well, I'm actually using isopropyl alcohol. And let me find a spot I don't care about. Yeah, behind these radio dials is usually a good spot. Let me just put a little dab there. And we'll wait a minute. Yeah, I can already see that. If you notice, the edges are starting to curl up a little bit. That's a good indicator. That's called pooling. And that's a good indication that I've got shellac here. Oh yeah, it's sticky. You see the finish is coming off on my finger. So yes, this is definitely a shellac. Well, unfortunately, I ran out of battery and didn't know it. So I missed out on showing you what I did, but I can go ahead and explain it real quick. I went ahead and stained that little piece that that we repaired and sanded earlier, and that was pretty simple. Just little Q-tip, and I use red mahogany, which is the color of the thing. I'm actually going to put another little dab on there. Just seems to be soaking in real well. I'm going to hit it again. I want this all to blend. Now, the good thing about the shellac finish is when I go to refinish, it's just going to cover all this up and you aren't even going to see that. Now, I did touch up a couple other little areas. This crack right here. And that's pretty much it. So we're now going to start the process of French polishing this front panel. There are some issues that have been repaired. We know about the cracks in the finish. Now French polishing is going to take care of that. So the first thing I'm going to do, now French polishing is an old technique that was used with shellac, and it actually predated sandpaper. They would use pumice mixed with the shellac to create the sandpapering effect, and they were able to get some pretty decent polishes going with it. I don't know how shiny Chelsea front panels were back in the 1920s, They could have been very high gloss, they could have been semi-gloss, they could have been hardly any gloss, who knows, without actually having been there. But we're going to go ahead and try and get a pretty decent gloss going on this. And it takes hours and hours and hours of work. Now obviously we're not going to be watching hours and hours of work on video, but I'm going to go ahead and show you some of the basic techniques, and then I'll go ahead and do the work and you'll see the finished product. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I need to get all the oil and wax and everything else off this surface. So what I'm going to do is use a little bit of naphtha, some triple-aught steel wool, and a little bit of elbow grease. Now I want to be real careful because I want to get the upper layers of shellac off of here, but I do not want to disrupt the graphics. So I gotta be real cognizant of that. And just use a little bit of steel wool, not a lot. So first step's cleaning. Just very, very lightly, not enough to... Alright. One of the first things I want to do is I need to stabilize this board a little bit. So what I'm going to do here is get it up there, put a couple screws in it very quickly. Okay, so that gives me a little more weight to work with here. Denatured alcohol is of course the solvent in shellac. There's a lot of videos online that teach you how to do French polishing. I'm not going to get into it that deeply, I'm just going to do it. And you know, you can kind of watch along a little bit. So first off is to get a couple of coats. So I'm basically going to lay this coat, let it dry, lay another one, let it dry, sand it down, and then begin the process. So let's get the base coat in. Soaking real good. Now I got to work quick because the denatured alcohol is going to melt into the old finish, and I can't stop. I need to get going and then let it sit. Okay. Okay, I'm going to get that second coat on here. So, without further ado, I'm going to begin French polishing. I've got my little rubber here. I've got my denatured alcohol in a little spray bottle. Let me get some shellac going. strips of a bit of alcohol there. And the mineral oil is kind of the important part. The purpose of the mineral oil is to keep the shellac from sticking. So now what I'm going to do is just kind of rub with the grain of the wood. It's looking good. Now, believe it or not, this stuff dries pretty quick. By the time you get to the other side there, this stuff is ready for another coat. So I'm just going to keep doing this for a little bit. French polishing takes literally hundreds and hundreds of layers, so I'm going to be doing this for a while and probably over the course of a few days. So I'm not going to sit there and videotape every hour of French polishing, but once I get it pretty much ready to go, I'll go ahead and tune back in and you can see the results. So day 2 of French polishing. So what I'm doing now is I'm taking a little bit of mineral oil and I'm doing some wet sanding on all the high spots. Using the mineral oil instead of water. Alright, we're into session number 5 here. Go ahead and remove this from my board. I'm not too concerned with these areas around the screws because they are actually going to be covered by dowels, so that's never been an issue. Here we go. So as you can see, it's kind of wet and rainy out. I'm going to go ahead and take this time to strip the paint off of this. First thing I need to do is get these little cardboard things taped off in a way that I can't get any water on them because that's part of this process. So I'm going to go ahead and do that first and then I'm going to get to stripping. So what I need to do, I'm going to put a little bit of stripper in the jar. Use an old brush. You want to put this stuff on nice and thick. A good thing about it being such a cold day is it's not going to evaporate as quickly. So give it time to work. And this stuff's working pretty quick. Just let this sit for a little bit and we'll rinse it off. So I went ahead and dried this all off a little bit outside just to get most of the water off. Still need to do a little more cleanup. What I'm going to do is remove all the tape and then use some acetone to get the little areas that the stripper didn't get. See, that cleans it right up. All that stuff that was remaining. Alright. So I'll go ahead and finish cleaning this up and then we'll go on to the next step. The next thing I'm doing is I'm just taking some steel wool and a little bit of acetone. Being real careful, I haven't been putting my glasses on here. And just kind of knocking off this surface rust. And you can see what an incredible difference that makes. We're down to bare metal, and now all we need to do is sand it, prime it, and get it ready for paint. Okay, I've done a little bit of cleanup here. I went ahead and got way down into those sockets and got all those years of oxidation off of those little tabs. I did the back side as well, although they really don't need to be done, but you know, why not? They're easy to get to. So my next step is going to be these 4 holes right here were actually drilled in there by somebody to put different transformers in there, and I want to seal those holes up. So what I'm going to do is put some tape down. Alright, and now you can see the back of the holes. I'm going to fill those with JB Weld. Alright, so I'll just go ahead and fill these holes. Make sure that's all in there. Okay, so my little repair is complete. It seems to be nice and hard, and that's what it looks like once you remove the tape. And it's still a little bit of an indentation there, so what I'm going to do is use some regular good old-fashioned Bondo body filler, and we're going to mix that up and go ahead and fill that up and sand it out. I don't need that much, I really don't. But Alright, so let's take a little bit of this. That should be good enough. So we'll go ahead and let that set up and sand it, and we should be about ready to start priming. Okay, got it all taped off and ready to go. So I'm ready to get started on painting this. Now here's another Chelsea Super 5 chassis in its original color. So when looking for a color, what I found was Georgia Clay from Krylon is a pretty close match there. So there you have it. The completed chassis. Should be able to see that. Can't even tell where they were. So the faceplate has been refinished. The chassis has been repainted. All the parts have been cleaned up, and we're ready to begin reassembly. Okay, so as I mentioned before, we did need a transformer. I was able to get this one from another radio that I'm working on. So we're going to use that one in this, but of course the first thing I need to do is make sure it's good. The Chelsea transformers, I already know where they're supposed to read, so kind of add an advantage there. I should be seeing about 1K on the primary. I'm sorry, yeah, 1K on the primary, and then about 6K on the secondary. That's a secondary there. And primary. should be about 1K. That's 9.38K, close enough. Or 0.938K. That is definitely close enough. And this should be about 6, and this is 5.89. Definitely close enough. Okay, let's do the same thing over here. Now the transformers are actually flipped, so I'll read the opposite on this side. Okay, that's 5.84. That's close enough to 6K. And this one should be close to 9.9 to 1K. That's 0.908K. Alright, I'm going to call that good. That is definitely a good transformer. So I can use that. Now I should have about 5K on these resistors. Let's go ahead and just measure them real quick. Yeah, 5.5. Well, 6K. There's 6K. Okay, that's good. Good on those. And then I have 3 capacitors that I need to check. I'll go to my capacitor checker. This should be 0.0005 microfarads, and I'm reading about 6.654 nanofarads. That's close enough. This one should be 0.0025. This is 0.355 nanofarads, so that's close enough. And this one here should be a 0.005 as well. I'm reading 0.6. So, okay, I'm good on my capacitors. So, all my active components are good. Therefore, this should be an operational radio once I get it all back together. And I'm going to go ahead and clean up this transformer. So now I'm going to get started on reassembling. I went ahead and put a little bit of feed and wax polish on the front panel there to help protect it a little bit. So first things first, let me go ahead and get these inserts in. Nice and tight. Okay. going to be an issue. Okay. Okay, so I noticed a little problem here, and now it makes sense. Yeah, I kept looking at it, and both of these were shorting to the center pin, and it wasn't right. All right. Yeah, I got these little washers here. They need to be soldered to this point here to give us a good connection. There we go. Okay. That's usable. That takes care of the front panel. Okay, now it's time to start getting the chassis assembled. You get the transformer in place. Okay, transformer is in place. Okay, that's it. Transformer's wired in. Okay, so transformer hooked up correctly. I have these two hooked to filament. This one's hooked to here. That one goes over to here. This comes over here to the plate. And the one back here goes up to that grid. Okay, all the connections are made. Transformer's in. Okay. Okay, everything's complete except for the harness, the cable harness that goes to the batteries. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new wiring harness. I'm going to use slightly different colored wires, but it is cloth covered, so it's period accurate, but unfortunately it's not the exact same colors that I need, which it's not a big deal because, you know, they don't make the striped colors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a black for the black yellow. I'm going to use yellow for the yellow red, and I'm going to use red for red, and I'm going to also use green for maroon, and blue for blue. That's the antenna right there. Red. Okay, so I'll go ahead and shrink that later. Well, this concludes part 2 of this series. We still have a ways to go yet. I still have a case that needs to be refinished, and on top of that we got to test the tubes. We're going to have to fire up the radio, make sure it works. We got to get the radio into the case after we've refinished it, and of course we need to test everything out before we ship it off to the customer. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please hit the like button. If you'd like to see more of this series or any other of the radios that we restore, please go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already done so. In the meantime, happy restorations, everybody. We'll see you next video. Goodbye.